What's up everyone, Man Bun Metalhead here. In this video, I'm going to compare this $150 guitar wireless system with this $500 guitar wireless system. Now before we get started, thanks for checking out this video, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss out on all this guitar tech awesomeness. If you've seen my other videos, you know I use the Line 6 G70 guitar wireless, and I really love it. Now the $150 wireless system that I'm comparing this to is the Xvive U2. Now if you haven't already, and you want to, please check out my full review of the G70. And if you've already seen that video and are considering downgrading to a different wireless, it might be worth checking out the rest of this video because I'll go into a little bit more detail of the G70. Now when looking at a guitar wireless system, there are 5 key categories that I think are really important. They are the size, the features that they give you, the range, the tone, and finally, the amount of noise that is added into the system. So I'm going to go through all these categories one by one and kind of give these two wireless systems a rating of 1 to 5, 5 being the best, 1 being the worst that they can do. So on to the first category, the size. You may be wondering why I'm looking at a $150 guitar wireless system when I'm already pretty happy with my current system, and the biggest reason is the size. The G70 is great, but my only gripe with it is the size that it takes on my pedal board and that extra pack that you have on your guitar strap or your belt. And really the size isn't that big of a deal, but having the extra space on my pedal board would be actually really nice. I'm looking to add maybe another pedal or two to that, and I don't have any space right now. And if you haven't checked out my pedal board tour, there'll be a link right there. Now if I compare the two receivers, you can see that there is a very big size difference. The receiver for the U2 is pretty much the same as the Guitar Bug. It's the same size and shape, and it would plug right in to whatever pedal or interface that you need to, and it just takes up no space at all, whereas this G70 does take up a little bit more space. And if we compare the size of the transmitters, they are not as substantial, but the U2 definitely wins out on this. It is the same size as the receiver and just plugs directly into the guitar. There could be a couple issues with it moving around, rotating around, but if you put a couple pieces of Velcro on your guitar body and the bug, that'll keep it from moving around a lot. And the transmitter pack for the G70 is slightly bigger. You have to clip it onto either your belt or your guitar strap. And if you want to switch between guitars, especially if you have it on your guitar strap, makes it a little more work to do that compared to this bug. But if you had it on your belt, probably wouldn't be as big of a deal. But I am a guitar strap kind of player. Again, size wise, the U2 wins out. I give the size for the U2 a 5 out of 5, and for the G70, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. I think it'd be a little nicer if the G70 receiver was just a touch smaller, closer to what a normal pedal would be. Now let's move on to features. And this is a clear winner for the G70. I mean, this is a $500 guitar wireless system. This is one of the higher end consumer grade products, and you just have so many different features. Now I'm not going to get into every single feature of the G70, but I will get into some of the features that I can compare with the U2. So first of all, the G70 has 16 channels, whereas the U4 has 4 channels. So there is a little bit of difference there, but it's nice that the U2 at least offers a few different channels. Changing the channels on the G70 is a little easier than the U2. You have to press a button, wait for some blinks. Selecting it on the G70 is just a dial, so makes that a little nicer, but with 4 channels, it's not really that big of a hassle. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to go from 1 to 4. The one thing to note is the battery life on these units as well. So the G70 transmitter does not use a battery. It has a power supply, and that makes sense. It's huge. The G70 transmitter pack actually uses 2 AA batteries. I use rechargeable batteries, so that's what I'm going to use for this comparison. Using straight AA batteries, I mean, that's going to get really expensive, so I'm not even going to do that comparison for you. The U2 transmitter and receiver both have internal lithium batteries, which is actually maybe good or bad. They both charge off of a micro USB, off of any normal USB charger. So you can use a cell phone charger. If you were to run these completely out of power, which I did, and charge them up, they take about an hour and 50 minutes each to charge. So it doesn't take a whole lot of time to charge. The only downside to having an internal battery on these, I think, is if you forget to charge these for a gig and there may be 25% to 50% power, you run out of power during the gig, you can't quickly change out batteries like you can on the G70. You have to charge them up, which is going to take you an hour 50, 2 hours, and you just don't really have any other options then other than using a regular guitar cable. Now the battery life itself on these is actually not bad. What I did is I plugged these into a reamp box, threw out some white noise, and turned them on and just let them go. I put a camera on them with a time lapse to see how long they last, and they lasted a lot longer than I thought. So the rechargeable batteries on the G70 transmitter pack lasted about 6 hours and 30 minutes, which actually isn't too bad. The transmitter on the U2 lasted for just over 7 hours, and the receiver on the U2 lasted for just over 8 hours. So you do have quite a bit of charge on these, and definitely way more than you really need for a night of gigging. But when it comes down to the U2, this is pretty much bare bones, and you would expect that for a $150 wireless, but I'll give the U2 a 2 out of 5, mostly because you have the option of changing channels. You have 4 channels on this compared to the 16 on the Line 6, but at least you have channels to choose from. Now let's look at the range of these two units. Advertised, the G70 has a range of 200 feet and the U2 has a range of 100 feet. Now that's in a straight line of sight distance, which really doesn't matter because if you're gonna get 100 to 200 feet away from something, you're never gonna be in line of sight, especially if you're playing at a venue, you're playing at a bar. Those numbers don't really mean a whole lot to me. So what I did is I went ahead and plugged these into my amp, walked around my house, and tried to see how they fared. The U2 did not fare that well. Once I got about 30 feet out of line of sight of the receiver, I started getting dropouts really bad. And that is actually really disappointing. Now I have been using this unit quite a bit, instead of just using a regular guitar cord while I'm sitting next to my computer playing. And it does work. I haven't had any dropouts when I'm not moving around, and I'm within a decent range. I mean, really just straight line of sight. I don't have a problem. So there's at least that. There could be uses for it, but if you're going to expect to be 100 feet away from this and have no problems, I'd be really wary of that. Now the range on the G70 is actually really great. I walked around my house. I got up to the second level on the other side of the house, and I could not experience any dropouts at all. And I didn't want to turn it up loud enough to hear it from my second floor because my wife would probably get pretty pissed. But I did have a lot of walls in between me and the receiver, and it didn't have any problems. And that really speaks a lot to the range of these two units. The G70 is way more robust, and the U2 just isn't. So I would give the range of these units, the G70 I would give a 4, and the U2 I would give a 2. I'm not going to give it a 1 because you can still have a little bit of range on it. It's not like you get 10 feet away like a normal guitar cable and you lose connections. So it has a little bit of use in there, just not as much as the G70. Now in order to test the tone aspects of these wireless systems, I'm not going to just play through a guitar and play that back to you guys and see what you think. We're gonna make this a little bit more scientific. To do so, we're gonna have to go to my computer. So here I am on my computer. Let me explain to you what I did for the tone analysis. And basically, it's a frequency analysis. So what I did is I took a pink noise signal generated in Reaper and output that through my Radial X amp. And that is a guitar reamp box. I then output that signal through either a 1/4 inch guitar cable, the U2 or the G70, and input that back into my Radial J48 DI box, which is an active DI box, and that went into one of my VP312 preamps. So basically from there, I pretty much calibrated the preamp by taking the 1/4" guitar cable level and getting that pretty close to even with the level from the pink noise. From there, I didn't touch the level of the preamp at all. So if one of the guitar wireless systems was a little attenuated or boosted, we would see that in the results. So let's get into kind of what I measured. So to do the comparison, I'm going to use a plugin called Span from Vox & Go. We'll bring that over and you can see the response, or actually the output of the pink noise. So it is this gray line. So let's go ahead and start comparing some of these signals. Now this is the 1/4" guitar cable response, and you'll notice that we do have a little difference in the levels, maybe only about 0.5 decibels, so it's not huge. But what you will notice, I think is pretty obvious here, is we have a little bit of attenuation on the low end and a lot of attenuation on the high end. That might not necessarily be the guitar cable itself. That could be a whole bunch of the signal path. But really, our guitar cable is what we're going to use as our reference. So if there's a roll-off from the guitar cable, there should be a roll-off on the high end from anything else. We're going to go over to our guitar cable, and now we have only the guitar cable, and now we can look at our two wireless systems. So let's start with the G70 first. So we'll overlay the G70 here, and you can see here that we do have a relatively similar response. We do have a little higher, maybe a 0.1 to 0.2 decibel difference in the low end. We have some differences here in the middle. We can see this knee up here on the G70 is just a little higher than that of the 1/4" cable. This is actually kind of interesting. This could be a couple factors. One is the G70 has a cable tone function, and I looked into that a little bit when I bought it. Basically, it's supposed to simulate different length guitar cables, and all that really does is cut down on the high end of the signal. I didn't really like it, so I don't use it, but you can see here that it does brighten that up just a touch. So let's take that away and go to the U2. So here I see way more differences. On the low end, we do see a little bit of attenuation, and we also see quite a bit more attenuation on the high end from the 1/4" cable. There is a little bit of difference in the middle. It looks like it's got a little bit of boost in the mid frequencies, but it's not too much. But the boost in the middle combined with the attenuations on the ends, the low end and high end, is going to really, I think, can dramatically change the sound. But actually now having seen this and the experience of having played with the wireless system a little bit, it does sound to me like it is slightly missing some high end. It's not really noticeable, but just looking at these graphs, you can really tell that there's a little bit of difference there, and you know, it's hard to determine whether or not you think that's worth it if you're going to pick this wireless to use, but the differences are definitely there. So now let's go look at the G70 and the U2 and kind of compare those together. So here we kind of see the same things that we saw on the high end and low end, where you get a little bit of attenuation from the U2, and we also see the same where we get a little bit of boost here on the mid frequency. So for tone, I give the G70 a 4 and the U2 a 3. I could give the G70 a 5, but it's not perfect. It's really close. It's so close. You saw it. It's like right there, but it is not perfect. So I feel like I can't give it a 5. Now the last category that I want to look at is the noise. And basically what that is what noise is added into the system overall from these wireless systems. So I did a couple of tests. One was plugging directly into the amp, and also the other was plugging into a pedal board. So plugging directly into the amp, I did the test with the 1/4" cable, with the U2, and with the G70. I set up a microphone and basically just measured the noise coming from the amp. And I did this with the transmitter off, the receiver on, the transmitter on but the volume of the guitar down, and with the volume of the guitar up. And from there I just set up a plugin to measure what the maximum peak that I measured during the 15 seconds or so that I recorded. So the first thing I want to do is get a baseline of how much noise it makes without really anything plugged into it. So I plugged the receiver in, but I didn't turn the receiver on, measured the output of the amp, and that was about negative 63 dB on both. Then I turned the receiver on and we started to get a bigger difference. On the G70, there was no extra noise added into the system, but with the U2, it went up to negative 50. So a 10 decibel difference there, and that's, I think, pretty considerable. So from there, I turned the transmitters on and turned the volume of the guitar down. So on the G70, the noise went up from negative 63 to about negative 60. So just a little bit added in there. And on the U2 went from negative 50 to about negative 45. So still the G70 is just a touch quieter. And also to add into this, I use a 1/4 inch cable at this point, plugged it directly into the amp, turned the volume down on the guitar, and I read about negative 64 decibels. So both of these wirelesses are adding a little bit of noise into the system. Then I turned the volume up on the guitar and didn't play anything, just held the strings. The 1/4 inch cable measured at negative 40. The U2 measured at negative 38, and the G70 also measured at negative 38. So by the time you got to the point where the volume was turned up on the guitar, it really didn't make a whole lot of difference. They're all relatively the same. So at this point, I ended up moving to my pedal board and amp, make sure I turn my pedal board on, and then plug the wirelesses directly into the pedal board. So I did the same kind of thing where I plugged them in, but I didn't turn them on, and they both read negative 53. I turned the receiver on. The G50 measured at negative 54. The U2 measured at negative 49. So just slightly louder on the U2. Turned the transmitter on and left the volume down. The G70 was at negative 53. The U2 was at negative 48. And having a 1/4 inch cable plugged in was negative 52. So it was actually slightly louder than the G70, but not by a whole lot. So at this point, I turned the volume up on the guitar. The G70 was at negative 36 decibels. The U2 is at negative 42, and the 1/4 inch cable is about negative 41. So at this point, the U2 is actually just a touch quieter than the 1/4 inch cable and a bit quieter than the G70. I really wasn't expecting this, but it does make sense. And I think the reason is the U2 uses battery power for the receiver, so there's no chance of getting any ground loops from the power source of the receiver, whereas the G70 uses a power source. And I mean, I use a couple power supplies in my pedal board, and it just could be ground loops coming from there. So it comes down to noise. I have to give the G70 a 4 and the U2 a 3. And really, in the end, when it comes to the pedal board, they are pretty close. The U2 is actually slightly quieter. However, in every other aspect of it, just turning the unit on, turning the receiver on creates noise. And I mean, that's a little unfortunate. So I really can't just rate it as high as the G70, unfortunately. So overall, if we look at all 5 categories and the rankings that I gave them, I would give the U2 a 3 out of 5, and I would give the G70 a 4 out of 5. I actually expected the U2 to fare a little worse. Not surprised where it ended up at, but overall, I don't think this is a guitar wireless that I can switch to. It's not a bad system. I think it's a good system for someone that's trying to get into guitar wireless and doesn't have a whole lot of money. This will definitely work for you. So maybe consider it, but just look out for some of the disadvantages and kind of things that I pointed out in this comparison. So that is it. That is a comparison between a $150 wireless and a $500 wireless. Definitely staying with that $500 wireless unless something better comes out in the future. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful. If you did, please give me a like down there below. Really helps me out a lot. And if you want to hear more about what I'm working on, mostly guitar and recording related videos, please give me a subscribe down there below and hit that little bell icon so you're notified whenever a new video comes out. But hey, until next time, rock on.